You saved my mother!" Emma froze at her doorway, staring at the stranger in the expensive suit. Behind her, the elderly woman she'd helped during last night's blizzard was humming while making tea. The same woman this powerful-looking man was calling his mother. The pieces clicked into place with stunning clarity. The designer watch, the perfect posture, the way she'd moved through Emma's kitchen with quiet grace. This wasn't some homeless woman caught in a storm. This was someone whose son drove a Bentley and commanded respect with every word. Emma had simply offered shelter during the worst blizzard in decades. She had no idea this one act of kindness was about to drag her back into the devastating betrayal that destroyed her career 3 years ago, and toward a justice she never thought possible. Subscribe now, because what happens next will restore your faith in karma. The winter storm descended upon the city like an unwelcome guest, its first assault sending a delivery van fishtailing through the intersection outside Emma Richardson's bakery. She watched the driver regain control through her flour-dusted window, then turned back to securing the day's last batch of sourdough. At 28, she had perfected the art of working alone, but tonight carried an edge that made even experienced city dwellers hurry for shelter. Comment below where you're watching from as we dive into this story of unexpected encounters. The weatherman had predicted heavy snow, but this felt personal nature testing every soul brave enough to remain outside. Emma's breath formed silver clouds as she locked the register, her wool gloves catching on the metal keys that had grown slick with ice. Mrs. Brooks from the flower shop next door was struggling with her security gate when Emma stepped outside. The elderly woman's arthritic hands couldn't manage the frozen lock mechanism, and Emma spent 5 minutes using her own body heat to warm the metal while snow accumulated on both their shoulders. This was Emma's neighborhood rhythm, small assists that bound the community together through harsh seasons and harsher economic realities. After Mrs. Brooks waved gratefully from inside her shop, Emma surveyed her own establishment one final time. The industrial ovens ticked as their cooling cycles wound down, filling the space with the metallic percussion of contracting steel. The scent of yeast had shifted from active fermentation to the dormant sweetness of overnight rest, and the radiators began their familiar pinging symphony as heat pushed through old pipes designed for gentler weather than this. Emma's walk to her sedan became a navigation exercise through obstacles the storm had created in 15 minutes. A blown stop sign lay across the sidewalk like a fallen tree, forcing her into the street where ice crystals crunched under her boots with the sound of breaking glass. She passed a food truck owner chaining his vehicle to a fire hydrant, both of them nodding in the universal acknowledgement of people facing the same enemy. The street lights created coronas in the driving snow that transformed familiar landmarks into ghostly suggestions of themselves. Each step required deliberate placement as her treads fought for purchase on pavement that had become a sheet of polished stone. The few other pedestrians moved with the hunched determination of soldiers under fire, heads down, scarves wrapped like armor against the wind's cutting edge. 3 blocks from her car, Emma spotted the figure huddled against Morrison's Hardware, a store that had been closed since the owner's heart attack 2 months earlier. At first glance, she mistook the shape for discarded merchandise covered by a tarp. But then she saw the trembling. The elderly woman appeared to be in her mid-60s, wearing a wool coat that belonged in a boardroom rather than a blizzard. Her leather gloves were expensive but inadequate, and her silver hair escaped from beneath a cashmere hat that was already heavy with accumulated snow. Emma's recognition of genuine distress was immediate and visceral. This wasn't someone caught off guard by changing weather, but someone genuinely lost and potentially in danger. The woman's posture suggested defeat, the kind of exhausted surrender that preceded hypothermia in urban emergencies. The stranger's eyes, when she looked up, held layers Emma hadn't expected: fear, certainly, but also a sharp intelligence that remained alert despite her physical vulnerability. When Emma spoke, the wind stole half her words, but her gesture toward the direction of her apartment was clear enough. The woman's acceptance came with a nod that managed to convey both gratitude and dignity, as if she were accepting assistance rather than charity. Together, they began the slow journey toward Emma's building, the older woman's grip on Emma's arm surprisingly strong, despite her obvious exhaustion. As they walked, Emma noticed details that seemed incongruous with homelessness or abandonment. The woman's watch was a Cartier that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. And her shoes were handmade Italian leather that had seen better days but still spoke of original quality. These observations registered but didn't alter Emma's primary focus, getting them both to warmth and safety before the storm claimed any victims tonight. Emma's apartment building had weathered decades of harsh winters, its brick facade and solid construction providing the kind of reliable shelter that newer buildings sometimes lacked. The lobby's radiator wheezed, but produced genuine heat, and both women paused to let warmth begin its work on their frozen extremities. Emma's second-floor unit was modest but immaculate, reflecting the same attention to detail that made her bakery successful despite its size. The elderly woman, who introduced herself simply as Margaret, moved through the small space with unconscious grace, her bearing suggesting familiarity with finer accommodations while showing genuine appreciation for the sanctuary Emma had provided. As Emma prepared tea and assembled a simple meal from her pantry staples, she became aware that Margaret was observing her domestic routines with the focused attention of someone who appreciated competence and kindness in equal measure. The evening developed into something neither woman had anticipated, a connection that transcended the circumstance that had brought them together. Margaret possessed conversational gifts that drew Emma into discussions ranging from neighborhood observations to philosophical reflections on community and isolation in modern urban life. Her accent carried traces of education and travel, while her questions about Emma's bakery revealed genuine curiosity about the business of creating something beautiful and nourishing from basic ingredients. As they shared Emma's simple dinner, Margaret's stories about the city's changes over decades painted pictures of a life lived with attention and engagement. When bedtime arrived, Emma insisted on giving Margaret her own bed while she arranged cushions on the living room sofa. Margaret's final words before sleep, a quiet thanks that carried emotional weight beyond the simple courtesy, left Emma wondering about the fuller story behind her unexpected guests' intelligent eyes and the subtle signs of a life lived in very different circumstances than her current predicament suggested. Dawn broke pearl gray over the snow-blanketed city, the storm's fury spent, but its consequences visible in every direction. Emma looked from her kitchen window. The familiar sounds of her morning routine were replaced by something extraordinary, the precise rhythm of someone who understood the alchemy of proper tea preparation. Margaret stood at Emma's modest stove, having transformed basic pantry ingredients into golden scones whose aroma suggested techniques learned in European kitchens. When she turned to greet Emma, her movements carried an authority that sleep and safety had restored. And Emma realized her overnight guest was considerably more formidable than the vulnerable woman she had rescued from the storm. Margaret had arranged Emma's mismatched dishes with mathematical precision, correcting the tea's steeping time, with a gentle touch that suggested years of maintaining standards regardless of circumstances. She folded the paper napkins into neat triangular fans, a small detail that elevated the humble setting into something approaching ceremony. As they sat together, Margaret spoke of her son with the careful word choices of someone accustomed to being quoted, describing him as brilliant, but isolated by success that had come at the cost of meaningful relationships. Her phrases were sculpted rather than casual, each observation offering insight while maintaining the privacy boundaries that wealth and prominence required. Emma found herself drawn into the portrait of a relationship complicated by achievement and expectations that neither mother nor son seemed equipped to navigate successfully. Bentley's arrival announced itself with an engine note that seemed to resonate through the building's foundation, a low, powerful hum that spoke of precision engineering and unlimited budgets. Margaret paused mid-sentence, and Emma caught a flicker of something complex crossing her features, anticipation mixed with resignation. Maternal love, tempered by long experience with disappointment. Emma moved to the window and saw a vehicle that belonged in a different economic universe than her neighborhood. Pristine, black paint that reflected the morning light, like still water chrome details that gleamed against the white snow with almost aggressive perfection. The car's presence seemed to alter the street's entire character, drawing curious glances from neighbors who recognized the visual vocabulary of serious money and power. When the intercom buzzed with electronic authority, Margaret rose from her chair with a transformation that was subtle but complete. The fragile woman who had sought shelter became someone accustomed to deference and respect, her posture straightening and her expression taking on the composed mask of someone who had spent decades managing public appearances. She moved to the window herself, looking down at the street with an expression that mixed affection and apprehension in equal measure. Emma sensed that whatever was about to unfold would fundamentally alter their brief but meaningful connection, and that the warm domestic scene they had created was about to give way to realities neither of them controlled. Nathan Cross filled Emma's doorway with the kind of presence that seemed to expand beyond his physical dimensions. His perfectly tailored charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes creating an immediate contrast with her modest apartment. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, his dark hair showing strategic silver at the temples, his blue eyes conducting a rapid assessment that cataloged everything from her building security system to the quality of her door locks. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority that came from years of being obeyed without question. But Emma detected something warmer underneath genuine relief at finding his mother safe and perhaps surprise at the quality of care she had received. His first words, "You saved my mother," were delivered with the precise diction of someone who chose language carefully and meant exactly what he said. "I was visiting Eleanor Hartwell on Maple Street," Margaret explained, settling into the role of mother with practiced ease. "The storm hit faster than anyone predicted. My driver couldn't navigate the streets, and I became disoriented." Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at this admission of vulnerability, and Emma glimpsed the complex dynamic between them, his protective instincts warring with respect for his mother's independence. The revelation reorganized everything Emma thought she understood about her guest, but what struck her most was the careful choreography of their interaction, Margaret's gentle insistence on proper thanks, Nathan's barely controlled impatience to return to his managed world, and the underlying current of mutual concern that neither seemed comfortable expressing directly. As Nathan helped his mother with her coat, Emma observed the precise way he handled the expensive fabric, not with casual wealth, but with the attention of someone who understood the value of quality things and treated them accordingly. Margaret's embrace goodbye was warm and genuine, accompanied by a whispered invitation to visit that carried more weight than simple courtesy. Nathan's final survey of Emma's apartment was thorough and professional, his eyes noting details with the systematic attention of someone accustomed to evaluating environments and people for both opportunity and risk. As they prepared to leave, Emma caught sight of a chipped ceramic mug sitting beside Margaret's Cartier watch on her counter, a juxtaposition that seemed to capture everything about the unlikely intersection of their worlds. The Bentley's departure left Emma's street feeling somehow smaller and quieter, as if the vehicle had taken some essential energy with it. She stood at her window, watching the sleek car navigate the snow-covered streets with the confident ease of superior engineering, carrying away 2 people who had briefly entered her carefully constructed life and left it fundamentally changed. Margaret's genuine warmth had been unmistakable, but Nathan remained an enigma. His gratitude seemed authentic, but Emma sensed depths of complexity that she couldn't begin to interpret. The morning that had begun with such domestic warmth was ending with questions about connections, obligations, and possibilities that Emma found both intriguing and unsettling. As she cleared away the breakfast dishes, she discovered that Margaret had left a $5 bill tucked beneath her saucer, not payment, but the kind of small gesture that acknowledged a service while respecting dignity. Nathan Cross appeared in Richardson's bakery 3 days later during the afternoon lull, his presence immediately altering the atmosphere of the small space in ways Emma hadn't anticipated. He looked oddly formal among the handwritten menu boards and flour-dusted surfaces, his navy suit and silk tie creating a stark contrast with the homey environment she had worked years to cultivate. His physical dimensions seemed to shrink the bakery's cozy proportions, not through arrogance, but through the simple fact of his accustomed authority making everything else appear smaller by comparison. When he spoke, expressing his desire to properly acknowledge her assistance to his mother, his words carried the weight of someone unaccustomed to being in anyone's debt. And Emma sensed that gratitude was uncomfortable territory for a man who preferred to control the terms of every interaction. The monetary offer Nathan presented was substantial enough to transform Emma's modest operation into something approaching prosperity enough to expand the bakery upgrade equipment and secure the kind of financial stability that currently required careful management of every expense. Emma's refusal was immediate and firm, delivered with an intensity that surprised them both and revealed convictions she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. She explained that helping Margaret hadn't been a transaction requiring payment, but simply human decency, a concept that seemed to puzzle Nathan in ways that went beyond mere cultural difference. Their conversation evolved quickly beyond simple gratitude into something resembling a philosophical debate about values, motivations, and the different frameworks people use to navigate relationships and obligations. "That's not how the world works," Nathan said, his tone carrying professional certainty rather than condescension. "Every action has value. Every service has a price point." "Your world, maybe," Emma replied, wiping down a counter that didn't need cleaning. "In my world, you help people because it's right, not because there's a transaction to complete." Their dialogue crackled with the tension of two intelligent people discovering that their fundamental assumptions about human behavior were incompatible, yet finding the intellectual challenge more engaging than either had expected. Their debate was interrupted by Mrs. Rodriguez, a regular customer who approached the counter with a day-old baguette and a complaint about its texture. Emma handled the situation with practiced grace, offering a replacement while asking gentle questions about storage conditions that revealed the bread had been left uncovered overnight. She provided a full refund anyway, explaining proper storage techniques with the patience of someone who genuinely cared about her customers' satisfaction rather than merely protecting her profit margins. Nathan watched this interaction with the focused attention of someone who evaluated people professionally, noting Emma's ethical choices when she thought no one was observing her professional behavior. The incident provided concrete evidence of the principles she had articulated in their conversation, demonstrating consistency between her stated values and actual practices. In the days following their bakery encounter, Nathan found himself returning to thoughts of Emma Richardson with a frequency that exceeded professional interest and approached genuine fascination. His preliminary research had revealed the basic architecture of her life. Former senior accountant at Henderson & Associates, current proprietor of a neighborhood bakery with a 3-year gap between positions that suggested a story more complex than simple career change. Her spreadsheet annotations, glimpsed during their financial discussion, revealed a mind that thought in systems and relationships rather than isolated numbers. Her margin notes used shorthand that indicated formal training combined with intuitive understanding of cash flow patterns and risk assessment methodologies. These weren't the analytical tools of someone who had stumbled into bookkeeping, but evidence of sophisticated financial expertise being applied to a deliberately modest enterprise. Emma, meanwhile, struggled to categorize her own reactions to Nathan Cross and what his unexpected attention might mean for her carefully reconstructed life. His physical presence was undeniably commanding, tall, impeccably groomed, moving with the confidence that came from decades of success and deference from others. But the moments when his corporate mask slipped revealed glimpses of something more human and vulnerable, genuine concern. When he looked at his mother, authentic gratitude when he thanked Emma, and perhaps loneliness in the careful way he maintained distance even while expressing appreciation. His offer of money had been clumsy, but seemed motivated by sincere desire to balance what he perceived as an obligation, suggesting someone who understood transactions but struggled with the nuances of genuine human connection. Nathan's return visit to the bakery occurred at closing time, his timing suggesting deliberate planning rather than casual convenience. This time, his approach was different, more tentative, less assured, indicating that he had given serious thought to their previous conversation and her concerns about his transactional worldview. Rather than offering money, he proposed a consulting arrangement that would allow Emma to apply her financial expertise to projects that could benefit from her analytical perspective while maintaining her bakery as her primary focus. The position would be part-time, well compensated, and structured to preserve her independence while providing the professional challenge and security that her obvious competence deserved. Emma found herself intrigued, despite her reservations, recognizing both the genuine opportunity and the careful way he had crafted the proposal to address her stated concerns about charity and autonomy. The conversation that followed revealed layers of Nathan's business philosophy that transformed Emma's understanding of his success and motivations. He spoke about cross-corporation with a passion that animated his usually controlled demeanor, describing projects that balanced profit with social impact in ways that suggested genuine commitment rather than mere public relations strategy. His questions about her analytical approach were probing but respectful, revealing his recognition of her expertise, while providing glimpses of the intellectual challenges his company faced in competitive markets. Emma discovered that she was enjoying the mental stimulation of discussing complex financial problems with someone who understood both the technical requirements and strategic implications of various solutions. When she finally agreed to consider his proposal, it felt less like accepting a job offer and more like accepting an invitation to explore possibilities that could satisfy both her need for intellectual engagement and her determination to maintain control over her life's direction. Emma's introduction to cross-corporation revealed an organization that defied her expectations of typical corporate culture, occupying 15 floors of a downtown tower where genuine innovation hummed beneath surfaces of understated elegance. The executive conference room where Nathan introduced her to his senior staff featured floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living artwork. But what impressed Emma more was the quality of questions his team asked about her analytical approach to cash flow optimization. Her first presentation involved restructuring payment schedules for a manufacturing client, and she found herself defending her recommendations to skeptical executives who challenged her assumptions with professional rigor rather than territorial defensiveness. Nathan's support came not through authority, but through targeted questions that highlighted the strengths of her approach, establishing her credibility while allowing her to demonstrate expertise independently. The whiteboard session that established Emma's reputation within the company occurred during her second week when the VP of Operations questioned her proposal to restructure their largest client's payment terms. Emma spent 40 minutes diagramming cash flow consequences across 3 fiscal quarters, her calculations revealing that the VP's conservative approach would actually increase default risk while reducing available capital for expansion. Nathan's intervention was understated but decisive. "Run both scenarios through the risk models," he said quietly, "and let's see which one protects our interest better." The analysis supported Emma's recommendations completely, and the VP's subsequent acknowledgement of her expertise marked a turning point in how the company's leadership perceived her contributions. Colleagues began seeking her opinions on projects beyond her official consulting scope, recognizing that her insights improved outcomes rather than complicating processes. The cultural dynamics at Cross Corporation became visible to Emma through small observations that revealed Nathan's leadership style and the organization's values. Staff members greeted him with respect rather than fear, and his questions during meetings focused on problem-solving rather than blame assignment when projects encountered difficulties. Emma noticed that Nathan remembered personal details about employees, asking about a daughter's college applications, checking on a spouse's medical treatment, acknowledging work anniversaries with genuine attention rather than corporate formality. When Emma arrived early for meetings, she observed Nathan in unguarded moments, reviewing reports with meticulous attention to detail, taking notes in margins that showed he read everything personally rather than relying entirely on summaries prepared by subordinates. His office walls displayed awards for community service alongside business achievements, suggesting priorities that went beyond pure profit maximization. Emma's editing of the company's new vendor payment policy revealed both her analytical precision and her sensitivity to the ethical implications of business decisions. The draft document she received contained standard language about payment delays and penalty structures, but her tracked changes revealed a different approach entirely. Her marginal notes questioned whether 60-day payment terms unfairly burdened small suppliers, and she suggested graduated schedules that protected cross-corporation's cash flow while ensuring smaller vendors received payment quickly enough to maintain their own operations. One comment written in careful handwriting read, "Considering the human cost of delayed payments, we can afford to wait 30 days instead of 60. Nathan studied her revisions with the attention he typically reserved for major contracts, recognizing that her changes reflected experiences with financial vulnerability that informed her professional judgment in ways that pure technical training could not. The corridor conversations that developed between Emma and various department heads provided insights into Cross Corporation's reputation within the broader business community, and Nathan's approach to leadership challenges. The Director of Human Resources mentioned that employee retention had improved significantly since Nathan implemented policies prioritizing work-life balance over pure productivity metrics. The Chief Technology Officer described Nathan's willingness to invest in experimental projects that might not generate immediate returns, but could position the company advantageously for future market changes. These conversations revealed an organization that balanced traditional business priorities with longer-term thinking about sustainability and social impact, suggesting that Nathan's success came not from ruthless efficiency, but from understanding that treating people well created competitive advantages that purely financial strategies could not achieve. Emma's growing appreciation for Nathan's character manifested through her observation of moments when he thought he was unobserved, his patience with newer employees who needed additional guidance, his habit of staying late to review reports that others might have delegated entirely to subordinates, and his genuine interest in innovative solutions regardless of their source. She began to understand that his controlled public demeanor masked someone who cared deeply about the human implications of business decisions even when expressing that concern required vulnerability, was reluctant to display openly. Their professional collaboration developed a rhythm of intellectual challenge and mutual respect that both found more engaging than either had experienced in previous working relationships. When Emma suggested modifications to a client proposal that Nathan had considered complete, he implemented her changes without ego or defensiveness, recognizing that her perspective improved the final product in ways that benefited everyone involved. The chemistry between them was undeniable but unspoken, manifesting through extended meetings, searching glances, and the mutual reluctance to end conversations that had moved beyond their official business purposes into territory that neither was quite ready to name or explore directly. Nathan's background investigation of Emma Richardson uncovered a story far more complex and troubling than the career transition he had initially assumed, revealing a 3-year-old injustice that had destroyed a promising future and forced a talented professional into exile from corporate accounting. The official record suggested resignation in lieu of prosecution for embezzling $50,000 from a client account at Henderson & Associates, but Nathan's experienced investigator had penetrated the surface narrative to expose evidence of systematic scapegoating. Emma had been 25 years old, recently promoted to senior associate, and working on accounts that required partner-level authorization for any fund transfers. The timeline of the alleged embezzlement coincided with her discovery of discrepancies in vendor payments that predated her access to the accounts in question, suggesting that her termination had been designed to prevent deeper investigation rather than punish actual wrongdoing. The conference room where Emma's career had ended remained vivid in her memory, with the kind of hyperclarity that trauma creates around crucial moments. She could still recall the partner's Mont Blanc pen clicking nervously against the mahogany table as he read accusations that transformed her from rising star to suspected criminal in 15 minutes of corporate theater. The senior partner who had mentored her development refused to meet her eyes during the proceedings, his silence more devastating than direct accusation would have been. The Human Resources representative had prepared termination paperwork before the meeting began, indicating that the decision had been made regardless of any defense Emma might offer. These fragments of memory surfaced unbidden whenever Emma encountered situations involving trust and professional evaluation, creating anxiety responses that she had learned to manage but never entirely overcome. Nathan's discovery of the background report came through his own carelessness, leaving the confidential document on his desk during one of their evening strategy sessions while he stepped out to take a call from his assistant. Emma's recognition of her own name on the cover page was immediate and devastating, transforming their developing professional relationship into something that felt like an elaborate evaluation process. The investigation was comprehensive and invasive, detailing not just her professional history, but personal information, including her current financial situation, rental history, and even medical records that documented the stress-related health problems she had experienced during her termination and subsequent unemployment. Her sense of betrayal was immediate and overwhelming, cutting through the trust they had been building and reducing their relationship to what felt like a calculated business transaction designed to assess her reliability and potential risks to his organization. Emma's first impulse was to confront Nathan immediately, but instead she carefully photographed the relevant pages with her phone, returned the document to its exact position, and waited for him to return to their meeting as if nothing had changed. This controlled response reflected the lessons she had learned from her previous experience with corporate politics, gathering evidence, maintaining composure, and choosing the timing and terms of any confrontation rather than reacting emotionally to discoveries that might disadvantage her position. When Nathan returned and continued their discussion of quarterly projections, Emma participated normally while internally processing the implications of his investigation and planning her response. Her ability to maintain professional demeanor while managing personal hurt demonstrated the emotional discipline that 3 years of rebuilding had taught her. But it also created a distance between them that Nathan noticed without understanding its source. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything either had experienced together, stripping away the careful courtesy that had characterized their professional relationship and revealing the raw emotions underneath their mutual attraction and respect. Emma's accusation that Nathan was no different from all the others who had judged her without understanding struck him with unexpected force, revealing how much her good opinion had come to matter to him in ways that went beyond professional assessment. His attempts to explain his motivations, standard corporate security procedures, fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, legitimate concerns about regulatory scrutiny, sounded increasingly hollow as he articulated them, each justification making his actions seem more calculated and less defensible. Emma's hurt was worse than her anger, revealing depths of vulnerability that made his investigative approach seem not just inadequate, but actively cruel, demonstrating his failure to recognize that some forms of due diligence were incompatible with genuine human connection. "You hired investigators to dig through my medical records." Emma said, her voice steady, but carrying undertones of exhaustion that suggested this betrayal was particularly painful because it was unexpected. "You could have asked me directly about anything you needed to know. Instead, you chose to treat me like a potential threat to be managed rather than a person whose trust you wanted to earn." Nathan's response revealed the gulf between his business instincts and emotional intelligence. "I needed objective information to make informed decisions. Personal conversations can be unreliable, and my responsibilities to the company require—" Emma interrupted him with a look that made further explanation pointless. She had heard variations of this reasoning before from people who prioritized institutional protection over individual dignity, and Nathan's sophistication didn't make his approach any less hurtful or her disappointment any less complete. Emma's resignation from her consulting role was delivered with professional precision that demonstrated her competence even while ending their working relationship, returning all proprietary materials and access credentials with meticulous attention to detail that ensured no one could later question her integrity or professionalism. Her letter was brief and unambiguous, acknowledging the value of their collaboration while making clear that their association was ending due to irreconcilable differences in approach and expectations. She deleted Nathan's contact information from her phone in his presence, a symbolic gesture that marked the finality of her decision more effectively than any verbal declaration could have achieved. As she walked out of Cross Corporation for what felt like the last time, Nathan experienced a sense of loss that went beyond professional setback, recognizing that he had destroyed something valuable through his inability to simply trust someone whose character and competence had been evident from their first meeting. The backup plan he had always maintained, investigating, first trusting, later had cost him the very connection he was beginning to understand he desperately wanted to preserve. Richard Sterling's entrance into Cross Corporation was orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. His reputation as a turnaround specialist preceding him through carefully placed recommendations and strategic introductions that positioned his merger proposal as an opportunity rather than an approach. At 52, Sterling had perfected the art of distinguished competence, his silver hair and bespoke suits creating an impression of gravitas that opened doors and inspired confidence in boardrooms across multiple industries. His presentation materials were flawless, his financial projections conservative but compelling, and his timeline for integration realistic enough to suggest genuine commitment rather than opportunistic acquisition. Nathan found himself impressed despite his usual skepticism about unsolicited partnerships. particularly as Cross Corporation faced increasing pressure from competitors with deeper capital resources and more aggressive expansion strategies. Sterling's interest in Cross Corporation had nothing to do with its growth potential, and everything to do with eliminating a 3-year-old liability that Emma Richardson's proximity to Nathan's resources had transformed from a manageable problem into genuine threat. Sterling had been monitoring Emma's activities through a network of contacts and private investigators since her departure from Henderson and Associates, ensuring that she remained effectively blacklisted from corporate employment while tracking any developments that might threaten the carefully constructed fiction that protected his reputation. Her association with Cross Corporation represented the first time since her termination that Emma had gained access to someone with sufficient resources and influence to potentially investigate her case thoroughly enough to uncover the truth about what had really happened at her previous firm. Emma's first glimpse of Sterling in Cross Corporation's marble lobby triggered an immediate physiological response: elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, and the kind of hypervigilance that came from encountering a predator in what should have been safe territory. 3 years had done nothing to diminish the impact of seeing the man who had systematically destroyed her career with the casual efficiency of someone solving a minor business problem. He looked exactly as she remembered, impeccably groomed, supremely confident, radiating the kind of authority that made others automatically defer to his judgment without questioning his motivations. Sterling's presence in Nathan's building felt like contamination, as if her past had tracked her down just when she was beginning to believe that maybe she could build something meaningful from the ruins of her professional life. The elevator encounter that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with both Emma and Sterling pretending not to recognize each other while engaging in a subtle battle of positioning and intimidation. When Emma stepped into the elevator, Sterling made a show of checking his watch and deciding to wait for the next car, but not before making eye contact that conveyed both recognition and threat. Emma rode to the 15th floor in silence, using the time to compose herself and plan her next moves, while Sterling took the stairs to demonstrate his physical fitness and control over the situation. Their mutual avoidance was tactical rather than coincidental, each recognizing that any direct confrontation in Cross Corporation's building could escalate in ways that would disadvantage Emma's position while providing Sterling with opportunities to shape the narrative to his advantage. Emma's immediate response to Sterling's presence was to implement security measures that her previous experience had taught her were necessary when dealing with someone capable of systematic character assassination. She texted her assistant to lock the bakery's rear entrance and vary her daily routines to avoid predictable patterns that could be exploited for surveillance or confrontation. Her exit from Cross Corporation that afternoon was deliberately public through the main lobby during peak traffic hours, creating witnesses to her presence and demeanor that could counter any subsequent claims about her behavior or motivations. These precautions reflected hard-won knowledge about how quickly someone with Sterling's resources and connections could construct damaging narratives around innocent actions, transforming defensive behavior into evidence of guilt and routine business activities into suspicious conspiracies. Sterling's reconnaissance of Cross Corporation's internal dynamics was methodical and sophisticated, beginning with casual conversations that extracted information about personnel relationships, decision-making processes, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited to advance his agenda. A junior analyst named Marcus Webb found himself answering seemingly innocent questions about the company's consulting arrangements, not recognizing that his responses were being cataloged and analyzed for strategic value. Sterling's business card left strategically near the reception desk after his initial meeting was designed to be noticed by Emma and convey the message that he had access to her professional environment whenever he chose to exercise it. The psychological pressure was subtle but constant, designed to create the kind of stress and anxiety that could force Emma into defensive actions that would justify more aggressive measures to neutralize the threat she represented to his continued success. Sterling's plan crystallized during his third meeting with Nathan when he introduced concerns about regulatory scrutiny and due diligence requirements that could complicate their potential partnership if Cross Corporation employed consultants with questionable backgrounds or unresolved legal issues. His argument was sophisticated and persuasive, using Nathan's own protective instincts against him by suggesting that Emma's continued involvement might actually put her at risk of unwanted attention from investigators and competitors looking for leverage against Cross Corporation. The trap was set with such subtlety that even Nathan's considerable business acumen didn't detect the manipulation underlying Sterling's seemingly reasonable concerns about risk management and corporate security. Sterling's success in planting these seeds of doubt demonstrated his understanding that the most effective attacks on someone's reputation came not through direct assault, but through patient cultivation of circumstances that would lead targets to make defensive choices that ultimately served the attacker's interests. Sterling's campaign against Emma began with the surgical precision of someone who had perfected the art of character assassination through decades of corporate warfare, presenting Nathan with a manila folder that contained what he described as due diligence materials that had surfaced during his team's routine background research. The documents painted a devastating picture of Emma's departure from Henderson and Associates. But their strength lay not in fabricated evidence, but in selective presentation of facts that created a narrative of guilt through omission of exculpatory information. Sterling's reluctance seemed genuine, as he expressed concern about bringing these materials forward, suggesting that he had struggled with whether to share information that could damage their potential partnership, but felt obligated by fiduciary responsibility to his own investors. His performance was masterful, combining apparent sympathy for Nathan's position with professional urgency about the legal and reputational risks of continuing to associate with someone who had never been officially cleared of serious financial crimes. Nathan's internal conflict was visible as he absorbed Sterling's revelations, not because they were entirely surprising, but because they forced him to confront the implications of his growing feelings for Emma, against the backdrop of potential criminal liability. Sterling's documentation included a time-stamped email that appeared to show Emma accessing client accounts after hours, though the timestamp had been altered to remove evidence that her access had been logged during a scheduled audit procedure. The folder also contained statements from former colleagues describing Emma as secretive and defensive, though these comments had been extracted from longer interviews that praised her competence and integrity. Sterling pressed his advantage by presenting these materials as representative samples from a larger investigation, implying that more damaging evidence existed but had been withheld out of consideration for Nathan's position and reputation. Emma's awareness that something had changed came through subtle shifts in the corporate ecosystem around her, meetings postponed without explanation, projects reassigned to other consultants, and the gradual erosion of the easy access she had previously enjoyed to information and decision-makers. When she finally managed to schedule a private meeting with Nathan, the distance in his demeanor was unmistakable and professionally devastating. His questions focused on her departure from Henderson and Associates, with an intensity that suggested he had received new information designed to cast doubt on her previous explanations. Emma noticed that Nathan had removed her from the distribution list for strategic planning documents, and her security badge no longer provided access to conference rooms where she had previously participated in high-level discussions about company direction and policy. The confrontation between Nathan and Emma occurred in his office after hours with the city lights below, providing a backdrop for a conversation that would determine whether their relationship could survive the pressure Sterling had brought to bear on both of them. Nathan's approach was legalistic and distant, presenting Sterling's evidence with the detached analysis he might apply to any business problem requiring resolution based on incomplete information and competing interests. Emma's responses became increasingly emotional as she realized that Nathan was choosing to believe documentation over personal knowledge, official narratives over lived experience, and professional caution over human trust. When Nathan suggested that perhaps it would be better if she stepped away from her consulting role until matters could be resolved through proper channels, Emma felt the familiar sensation of being discarded by people who found her inconvenient rather than worthy of loyalty or support. "You're asking me to prove my innocence again," Emma said, her voice carrying exhaustion that went beyond the immediate situation. "I've already lost one career to accusations I couldn't disprove. Now you want me to step aside while you decide whether I'm worthy of the trust I thought I'd already earned." Nathan's response revealed the gulf between his business training and emotional intelligence. "I have responsibilities to shareholders, employees, and regulatory agencies that require me to make decisions based on available evidence rather than personal feelings. If you're truly innocent, then proper investigation will vindicate you completely." Emma's laugh was bitter and knowing. Proper investigation by whom? The same people who destroyed my reputation the first time, or new investigators who'll start with the assumption that where there's smoke, there's fire? Margaret's position in the deteriorating situation between her son and Emma was particularly painful because she understood both perspectives while being powerless to reconcile them effectively. Her conversations with Nathan became increasingly strained as she watched him retreat into the emotional isolation that success had made comfortable but ultimately self-defeating. Margaret had seen something in Emma that gave her hope for her son's future happiness, a warmth and integrity that she feared he might never encounter again in his rarefied professional and social circles. Her visits to Emma's bakery continued, but they were marked by a sadness that both women felt acutely without directly addressing. Margaret spoke carefully about Nathan's tendency to prioritize institutional protection over personal loyalty, while Emma struggled with disappointment that went beyond professional setback into territory that felt like personal betrayal of the deepest kind. The snow that began falling again during Emma's final week at Cross Corporation seemed to mock the memory of the storm that had brought them together, creating a world that was beautiful but cold pristine, but isolating in ways that reflected the emotional landscape both Nathan and Emma now occupied. Nathan threw himself into the Sterling merger negotiations with renewed intensity, using work to avoid thinking about the empty feeling that had settled in his chest and the growing recognition that he was about to lose something irreplaceable through his own inability to choose trust over caution. Emma found herself unable to find satisfaction in the familiar routines of her bakery, her thoughts constantly drifting to projects she would never complete and insights she would never be able to contribute to solutions that could have benefited from her analytical perspective. Both began to understand that what they had lost transcended professional collaboration, encompassing possibilities for connection and understanding that neither had fully appreciated until they were gone, destroyed by forces that seemed designed to prevent the kind of genuine partnership that their brief collaboration had suggested might be possible. Nathan's investigation into Sterling's claims began with growing doubts about the evidence presentation and his increasing discomfort with his decision to abandon Emma, based on accusations rather than proven facts, leading him to hire the same private investigator who had originally researched Emma's background. This time, however, the directive was comprehensive. Uncover the complete truth about Emma's departure from Henderson & Associates, Sterling's business relationships, and any connections between the two that might explain why this particular case had surfaced at this particular moment. The investigators' findings were devastating in their implications, revealing a pattern of systematic corruption within Henderson & Associates' upper management that had used Emma's termination to cover up financial crimes far more serious than anything she had been accused of committing. The breakthrough came through a misfiled vendor ledger that had been archived incorrectly, containing payment authorizations that proved Emma had never had access to the accounts from which money had allegedly been stolen. More damaging still was a storage unit receipt found in Sterling's business records, indicating monthly payments for a facility that contained documents related to Henderson & Associates' investment activities during the period when client funds had been diverted to cover losses from unauthorized, speculative trading. The investigators' analysis of financial records spanning 3 years revealed that Sterling had been a silent partner in several high-risk investments that used client money without disclosure or authorization, generating returns that initially masked the missing funds until market downturns exposed the full extent of the illegal activity. Nathan's confrontation with Sterling took place in the Cross Corporation boardroom, with legal counsel present and recording equipment activated to document what Nathan suspected would be admissions of criminal conduct that could be used in subsequent legal proceedings. Armed with comprehensive evidence of Sterling's role in framing Emma and covering up financial crimes, Nathan abandoned his usual diplomatic approach to business negotiations and systematically presented documentation of conspiracy, fraud, and defamation that had destroyed an innocent woman's career to protect Sterling's reputation and financial interests. Sterling's initial denials crumbled as Nathan revealed the depth of his investigation, including testimony from former Henderson & Associates employees who had been pressured into supporting false accusations against Emma through threats to their own employment and professional references. The storage unit in Millbrook contains every document that proves Emma Richardson's innocence and your guilt, Nathan said, placing photographs of the facility and its contents on the conference table. Shipping manifests investment agreements, email correspondence between you and David Brooks about managing the Richardson problem. Your legal team might want to explain why you've been paying to hide evidence for 3 years. Sterling's final position was that he had simply relied on information provided by others, but Nathan's evidence clearly established his active role in orchestrating Emma's downfall. The merger discussions ended with Sterling's immediate departure and Nathan's promise that law enforcement would receive complete files documenting all criminal activity uncovered during the investigation. Nathan's recognition of his own complicity in perpetuating the injustice against Emma settled on him with crushing weight, revealing the magnitude of his failure to trust and protect someone who had deserved his support rather than his suspicion. The realization that Emma had been carrying the burden of false accusations for 3 years while maintaining her integrity and rebuilding her life made his retreat into corporate formality seem not just unfair, but actively cruel. His business training had taught him to verify first and trust later. But in Emma's case, this approach had led him to participate in the very kind of institutional injustice he claimed to oppose. A board member's casual remark about missing Nathan's usually reliable judgment served as a painful reminder that his personal failures were affecting his professional performance in ways that others had begun to notice. Nathan's attempts to reach Emma immediately after his confrontation with Sterling were met with the kind of dignified refusal that was probably deserved but felt devastatingly final. Nonetheless, his calls went directly to voicemail, his letters were returned unopened, and his assistant reported that Emma's bakery staff had been instructed to inform him that she was unavailable for any meetings or conversations. Margaret's disappointment in his behavior was evident despite her carefully neutral language when she visited his office to discuss what she termed missed opportunities and poor judgment. Her pointed observations about the rarity of finding genuine goodness in contemporary business culture carried clear implications about what Nathan had lost through his inability to believe in Emma when she most needed his faith rather than his caution. Nathan found himself practicing apology speeches alone in his office, then discarding them as inadequate to address the depth of harm his actions had caused to someone whose trust he had destroyed through institutional paranoia disguised as professional responsibility. The cross-corporation board meeting convened with unusual urgency, carried an electricity that board members hadn't experienced since the company's initial public offering, as Nathan had promised revelations that would affect not just their current business relationships, but their understanding of corporate ethics and fiduciary responsibility. The boardroom filled with directors, senior executives, and legal counsel all summoned to witness what Nathan had described as a case study in how good intentions could perpetuate injustice when institutional caution was allowed to override human decency and basic fairness. His presentation was methodical and devastating, laying out the complete timeline of Emma's false accusations, Sterling's role in orchestrating her downfall, and the systematic cover-up that had protected actual criminals for 3 years while destroying an innocent woman's reputation and career prospects. Sterling's attendance at the board meeting was the result of Nathan's carefully orchestrated trap informing him that the session would focus on finalizing merger agreements and discussing integration timelines rather than investigating backgrounds or reviewing due diligence materials. Sterling's confidence evaporated visibly as Nathan began presenting evidence of his criminal conduct, his usual polished demeanor replaced by increasingly desperate attempts to minimize culpability and shift responsibility to other parties who could not defend themselves. Board member Patricia Williams stopped taking notes entirely when Nathan presented recorded conversations between Sterling and David Brooks discussing strategies for containing the Richardson situation, while Director Thomas Hayes removed his glasses and cleaned them twice during the presentation of financial documents that proved Emma's innocence beyond any reasonable doubt. Emma's entrance into the boardroom was unannounced and dramatic, her presence immediately transforming the atmosphere from business formality to moral reckoning that demanded accountability rather than mere policy adjustments. She had come not in response to Nathan's invitations, which she had ignored completely, but because Margaret had finally convinced her that facing Sterling publicly was the only way to fully reclaim her reputation and demonstrate that she would no longer be intimidated by threats or influenced by fear of retaliation. Emma's presence commanded attention not through theatricality, but through the quiet dignity of someone who had survived systematic persecution and emerged stronger rather than broken. She placed a sealed envelope in the center of the conference table payroll audit pages she wasn't supposed to possess, documenting unauthorized bonus payments that correlated exactly with the timeline of her termination. The confrontation between Emma and Sterling was electric, with years of suppressed anger and injustice. But Emma's approach was measured and devastating rather than emotional or vindictive, demonstrating that she had spent 3 years preparing for this moment rather than simply hoping it would never come. She addressed Sterling directly for the first time since her termination, acknowledging his presence with the kind of cold professionalism that made clear she was no longer the vulnerable young accountant he had once manipulated and destroyed through careful orchestration of evidence and testimony. Her questions were precise and legally sophisticated, forcing Sterling to confront the human cost of his actions while providing him no avenue for excuse or rationalization that could withstand scrutiny from the legal professionals present to witness his responses. Nathan's public apology to Emma was perhaps the most difficult moment of his professional life, requiring him to acknowledge not just personal failure, but institutional complicity in perpetuating an injustice that had caused immeasurable harm to someone whose only crime had been discovering evidence of financial wrongdoing. His words were carefully prepared, but clearly heartfelt, accepting full responsibility for allowing business concerns to override moral imperatives and human loyalty when Emma had needed support rather than investigation. He spoke about his own failures of judgment and character, acknowledging that Emma's suffering had been compounded by his inability to trust her when such trust would have required courage rather than merely professional courtesy. His offer to make whatever amends might be possible was delivered without expectation of forgiveness, recognizing that some breaches of trust created wounds too deep to heal through apologies alone, no matter how public or comprehensive those apologies might be. Emma's response to Nathan's contrition was measured and thoughtful, acknowledging his investigation and exposure of the truth, while making clear that forgiveness would require demonstrated change over time, rather than eloquent speeches delivered in front of witnesses who could provide social pressure for reconciliation. She expressed appreciation for his willingness to risk his reputation and business relationships to vindicate her, recognizing the personal and professional costs he had incurred in challenging Sterling's narrative and exposing systematic corruption that extended far beyond her individual case. "Trust isn't rebuilt through apologies," she said quietly, "but through consistent actions that prove the apology was genuine rather than convenient. I appreciate what you've done today, but I need to see what you do tomorrow and the day after that before I can consider whether we have a foundation for any kind of relationship, professional or otherwise." The board meeting concluded with Sterling's immediate expulsion from all business relationships and a unanimous resolution commending Emma's integrity while acknowledging the company's failure to protect her from injustice. But the real resolution would depend on whether Nathan could demonstrate that his recognition of error would translate into sustained behavioral change, rather than merely temporary embarrassment about poor judgment. Within days of the board meeting, Sterling's empire cracked like ice under spring sun. Frozen credit lines, a downtown office, sealed with court orders, and a phone that had stopped ringing as former allies crossed streets to avoid his name. The federal charges came with morning coffee and evening news: conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction of justice. Emma watched the coverage from her bakery counter, feeling not satisfaction but a quiet settling in her chest, like dust finally allowed to rest. Nathan's vindication campaign wasn't conducted through press releases. Instead, he sat at his desk each evening writing letters by hand to 23 industry leaders who had heard Sterling's version of events. The fountain pen Margaret had given him scratched across cream stationery as he detailed Emma's innocence, her competence, his own failure to recognize both sooner. His assistant found him past midnight, surrounded by sealed envelopes, each carrying his personal guarantee of Emma's integrity and acknowledgement that her persecution had been criminal rather than justified. Employment offers arrived like spring flowers: Goldman Sachs, Brookings, University of Chicago. Emma spread them across her kitchen table beside morning coffee, studying opportunities that would have thrilled her 3 years ago. Now they felt like echoes of someone else's ambitions. She picked up the phone twice to call Nathan about his CFO offer, then set it down, watching steam rise from her cup while weighing vindication against the harder question of what she actually wanted rather than what she deserved. Her decision came on Thursday when she walked through Cross Corporation's 15th floor, pinning an unsigned memo to bulletin boards in every department break room. The single page outlined whistleblower protections, independent oversight ethics training. At the bottom, handwritten, institutions exist to serve people, not the other way around. Employees gathered around the notices as she moved through hallways, reading over each other's shoulders, some nodding at principles that felt revolutionary only because they were so rarely implemented. Margaret's satisfaction was visible in the way she hummed unconsciously while arranging day-old pastries for the homeless shelter donation box. Nathan had called that morning to discuss Emma's return, not asking permission, but seeking guidance about rebuilding trust through actions rather than apologies. Margaret had listened, then simply said, "Start with listening to her." The advice was simple enough that he might actually follow it. Emma found Nathan in his office Monday morning, not behind his desk, but sitting in the visitor's chair, a contract spread on the coffee table like a peace offering. The CFO position came with terms she had written maintaining the bakery independent legal counsel the right to walk away without explanation. When she signed, he didn't make speeches. He just said, "Thank you," and the words carried weight that formal congratulations never could. Changes at Cross Corporation weren't measured in policy manuals, but in how people moved through hallways, more eye contact, fewer closed doors, a sense that speaking up was encouraged rather than merely tolerated. Emma's influence spread through small actions, sitting in on vendor calls, until silence forced better terms, reviewing expense reports that revealed waste disguised as tradition. Her office door stayed open, and people began stopping by with questions that had everything to do with doing the right thing, when the right thing wasn't immediately profitable. Winter light slanted through Emma's office windows as she finished her first quarterly report as CFO, numbers telling a story of sustainable growth built on principles that wouldn't need defending in congressional hearings. She could hear Nathan's voice through the connecting door laughing at something his assistant had said, a sound common enough that she'd stopped noticing until this moment, when she realized laughter was what accountability and second chances sounded like when they actually worked. The rhythm Emma created between her two professional lives became meditation Saturday mornings at 5 a.m., measuring flour by feel, listening to yeast work at Slow Magic, then Monday mornings reviewing acquisition targets while her fingers still smelled of vanilla extract. The scents marked different kinds of thinking steam, from proving baskets, click of calculator keys, rustle of spreadsheets mixed with the crackle of cooling bread. Her weekend customers learned to arrive early, knowing that by noon she'd be gone to review financial reports, but her croissants would never taste like compromise. Nathan's education in emotional intelligence progressed through small corrections and patient observation, learning to read Emma's signals when she needed space, versus engagement when professional discussion was welcome, versus when she preferred talking about books or neighborhood changes unrelated to quarterly projections. He discovered that genuine partnership meant admitting mistakes immediately rather than defending decisions until forced to acknowledge error, that listening required more effort than talking, and that Emma's respect was earned through consistency over time rather than dramatic gestures motivated by guilt as easily as affection. Their Tuesday morning strategy sessions developed intellectual intimacy that surprised them both. Emma's financial modeling providing foundation for Nathan's vision, while his market instincts transformed her numbers into actionable intelligence. The whiteboard in his office stayed covered with their joint calculations for days after each meeting, equations representing thinking neither could have achieved independently. Colleagues noticed both seemed more engaged in leadership roles, decisions coming with less struggle and better outcomes when their analytical approaches were combined. Margaret's Thursday afternoons with Emma had evolved into family time, teaching each other techniques that bridged generations. Margaret's classical French methods, elevating Emma's skills, while Emma's contemporary approaches streamlined production without sacrificing quality. They worked mostly in comfortable silence, hands moving through familiar motions, while the oven filled Emma's kitchen with warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with being understood without explanation. When Nathan first asked permission before telling Emma's story in a speech, she set conditions quietly but firmly, focus on institutional failure, not personal heroism. Acknowledge his mistakes. Make clear that justice delayed was still injustice. He agreed without argument, and watching the video later, she recognized someone who had learned the difference between public relations and accountability. The speech generated inquiries from other companies, but Nathan referred them all to Emma. Understanding her expertise deserved direct recognition rather than reflected glory. Emma's boundary-setting education for Nathan was conducted through clear communication about what she would and would not accept, teaching him that trust was rebuilt through daily choices rather than milestone achievements, that forgiveness was not a project to be completed, but a relationship to be maintained through ongoing attention and respect. Their first dinner together outside work happened accidentally, both staying late, ordering takeout, talking about everything except business, until security reminded them the building was closing. Walking to the parking garage together, Emma realized she was looking forward to the next accidental evening rather than planning ways to avoid extended interaction. By spring, the space between Nathan's office and Emma's had become a corridor of collaboration, people consulting both on decisions that benefited from combined perspective. Their different leadership styles complemented each other in ways that made the entire organization more effective. His strategic vision balanced by her operational precision, her ethical framework supported by his willingness to prioritize principles over short-term profit when the two conflicted. The evening Emma found Nathan in her bakery kitchen following instructions for proofing sourdough starter marked a shift neither acknowledged directly but both felt clearly. He moved carefully through her space, asking questions about technique that revealed genuine curiosity rather than mere politeness. When the bread emerged golden from her oven, they shared it warm with butter while rain drummed against windows, two people who had learned that the most meaningful successes were often the smallest ones, measured in moments of understanding rather than quarterly reports or public recognition. Cross Corporation's transformation had become a business school case study. But Emma measured success differently in the way employees made eye contact in hallways, in doors that stayed open, in the general sense that speaking up was encouraged rather than merely tolerated. Her influence spread through small actions rather than policy manuals, sitting in on vendor calls until silence forced better terms, reviewing expense reports that revealed waste disguised as tradition. Industry publications wrote about their innovative approaches, but what mattered more was the young analyst who came to her office to report a discrepancy without fear, the way problems surfaced early instead of festering into crises. The engagement celebration at Richardson's Bakery mixed neighborhood friends with cross-corporation executives, Margaret serving as unofficial hostess for a gathering that welcomed diversity over exclusivity. Emma's homemade wedding cake was a masterpiece that impressed guests accustomed to elaborate catered affairs, while Nathan's speech about second chances captured what they had built together through surviving challenges that could have destroyed them entirely. The intimate setting allowed genuine conversations between people who might never have met otherwise, connections based on shared appreciation for the couple's journey rather than mutual self-interest. The unexpected snowstorm arrived like a gift, providing Emma and Nathan the opportunity to demonstrate how completely their priorities had evolved. Without hesitation, they opened the bakery doors to anyone seeking shelter, transforming their private celebration into community gathering. Nathan's expensive suit was soon dusted with flour from helping Emma prepare food for unexpected guests. His contentment in these circumstances revealing transformation from someone who once measured success purely in financial terms to someone who understood that genuine prosperity included service to others without expectation of direct benefit. The evening evolved into something magical as neighbors shared stories with corporate executives, teenagers learned baking techniques while banking officials sampled homemade bread, and the warm glow of bakery lights created an atmosphere that transcended economic boundaries. Emma moved through the gathering with quiet grace, equally comfortable discussing merger strategies and sharing family recipes, while Nathan discovered the satisfaction that came from creating welcome rather than commanding deference. As the storm subsided and guests departed with gratitude and promises to return, Emma and Nathan found themselves alone where their relationship had begun, cleaning up from an evening that had brought together every aspect of their lives. The symmetry wasn't lost on them, snow falling outside, while they worked together 1 year after Margaret's need for shelter had created an opportunity for connection neither had initially welcomed. But what struck them most was recognition of how much they had both grown from the people they were during that first encounter. Margaret's assistance with cleanup provided an opportunity for the three of them to work as family, sharing quiet conversation about hopes for the future, while acknowledging the journey that had brought them through difficulties toward mutual respect that felt sustainable rather than temporary. Their shared tasks, washing dishes, storing leftover food, arranging furniture, created domestic intimacy that was comfortable rather than forced, suggesting relationships built on foundations strong enough to support both celebration and routine responsibility. The final image showed Emma and Nathan walking home through quiet streets with Margaret between them, three people who had found family connections that made individual success meaningful, and love that transformed personal achievement into shared joy. Behind them, Richardson's bakery's windows glowed warmly in the snowy night, a beacon of hospitality that had started everything. The storm that had once threatened to overwhelm them had instead become foundation for all they had built together, proving that sometimes the most difficult circumstances create opportunities for grace, justice, and love to flourish in ways that transform not just individual lives, but entire communities through example of what becomes possible when people choose trust over fear and authentic connection over superficial success.